Joining me now, first class father, Dean Stott. Welcome to First Class Fatherhood.
Thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
Honored to have you here. Let's start it like this. How many kids do you have? How old are they?
I have three kids. I have a 12-year-old daughter, a 7-year-old son, and a 10-month today old daughter as well. So I've spread them out.
Wow, very cool. You going to try to even the score there, or are you all done with the three?
I don't know. It depends. You know, all three of them got one thing in common. None of them were planned. So, you know what I mean? Never say never.
I like your style. All right, Dean, if you could just take a second here to hit my listeners with a little bit about your background and what you do.
So obviously from my accent, I'm from the UK originally. I used to be in the UK Special Forces, the Special Boat Service for 16 years. Then had a accident, left that, worked in the private security sector for a while, working around the world in some of the hot spots, and then took a sabbatical to actually spend more time with my family because I had totally disconnected from them, and decided I was always wanted to leave a legacy. Never cycled before, decided to cycle the world's longest road from southern Argentina to northern Alaska, having only cycled 20 miles and applied for the world record. A year, 18 months later, actually broke two world records, became the first man in history to cycle it under 100 days, and more impressively raised $1.3 million for mental health. But and then from that, my sort of profile then sort of got exposed. I came out of the shadows of the Special Forces. I have my own book. I do TV work and, you know, international guest speaking, but still behind the scenes very much now in the security industry still. That's an area that I always tend to fall back into.
Yeah, really amazing stuff, Dean. And one of the reasons why I bring so many military dads on here is just, you know, one of the things is too, like you said, the Special Forces community guys are now out of the shadows, which I think is a big benefit to our society, that we have access to see you guys, speak to you, listen to your advice. I mean, I think it's really invaluable, the amount of, you know, knowledge that you guys have to pass on to the civilian world, which I think is incredible. And the other part is too, just like you mentioned, to spend more time with your family. You guys sacrifice so much, and to focus on what you're doing in that community, especially Special Forces, it takes so much out of you that it's hard to focus on family while you're doing it. And it's another reason why I honor so much the men and women that serve. So at one point then, you said 12 years old, I believe, is your oldest, your daughter. Take me back then 12 years. At what point, where were you at with your career when you first became a father? How old were you, and how did that experience change your perspective on life?
So I got injured in 2010 from the Special Forces. I left in May 2011. My daughter was born the 1st of June 2011. So she was born as I left the military. But as I was leaving the military, I never planned on leaving the military. Unfortunately, it was a parachuting accident I didn't foresee, and I didn't see a career outside of that community. So for me, when my wife was 8 months pregnant, I didn't know whether there was any work there. How was I going to support the family and such? So within 48 hours of leaving the military, in the middle of May, I got a phone call to help set up the British Embassy in Benghazi during the Arab Spring. So I actually flew out to Libya, which at the time was a no-fly zone, 3 weeks before my wife was due to give birth.
Wow.
Thankfully for me, I managed to get back in time for the birth. But I got my wife home. My wife gave birth on the Friday evening. Sunday evening, she was back home with the baby. 6 o'clock next morning, I was on the next flight. I was off to Guinea doing another task. Because for me, I had to be able to support my family. I had that sort of worry. But then 5 years later, I built a great reputation within the industry, and soon realized that I'd only been home 21 days in a 365-day calendar, and something had to change. It's very different when you're in the military because you have to go away. You know, it's part of your job. You know, you're deploying because you have to deploy. This was more of a choice. It was me having a choice to go away all the time, and then soon realized I was trying to match the adrenaline rush I had in the Special Forces without coming to terms with the fact that I'd left, and so I was doing dangerous missions as a civilian, but without that top cover. And so, yeah, my wife and I had quite an in-depth conversation. It's chapter 16 in the book. It's called Dead or Divorced. And it was like, if you continue with this lifestyle, you will either be dead or you will come home, and me and Molly won't be here. So unfortunately for Molly, my 12-year-old, it was a blink. And she was 5 years old. I'd missed a lot of her childhood and learned a lot from that with my next two.
Yeah, and so many of the guys, I've had so many of the Navy SEALs, Green Berets, so many of the Special Forces guys on here, and the divorce rate is extremely high in those communities, and it makes sense as to why. You guys are gone so much of the time, and so much of your focus is on what you're doing, and it's it's such an unfortunate balance that has to be made, because we need you. Thank God we have guys like you to do this, but the toll it does take on personal lives is incredible. Now, you said you were there in 2011 for the Arab Spring. That was right when the Benghazi incident went down. That year was in September. I've had a bunch of those guys on. I've interviewed Tig, Oz, Tonto. They've all been on the podcast here, all great dads. Were you there while that whole thing went down?
Yeah, so 2011 was the year before. I was trying to find a niche within the security industry, and in 2011, so this was when Gaddafi was still cordoned in Tripoli. But a lot of these big security companies were charging 6-7 figure sums for crisis management and evacuation plans, which weren't actually in place. And as we've seen more recently in Afghanistan, still seems to be the same within the security sector. So I bought 30 weapons on the black market. I buried them between Tunis and Egypt and designed my own evacuation plans. 2012, with what you're referencing, I just finished the London Olympics, and I was in Benghazi that evening when it all went down. And so I single-handedly got a German oil company, 8 engineers, from Benghazi back to Tripoli through safe houses that I had in the desert. So as it was unfolding in the city, I was slipping out the back with these German engineers. And because of the success of that, 2 years later, I get a phone call from the Canadian embassy telling me that they were stuck behind in Tripoli. Everyone else is gone. Your name keeps coming up. So I went in and I single-handedly evacuated the Canadian embassy, 18 military and 4 diplomats from Tripoli back to Tunis. And it was after that task that me and my wife then sat down, and she sort of, grounded me and said, I've only seen you 21 days. And so I had just disconnected from society. And generally it was a lack of communication between me and my wife. I thought she wanted me to be away so I could earn money. I wanted to earn money for them. But when in fact, my wife was very successful in business herself. She was a property developer. And so, yeah, once we sat down and cracked a couple of bottles of red wine, it soon came to reality that the yin and yang balance of family and work wasn't level.
Yeah, and I had the year wrong. Yeah, it was 2012, but September 11th.
Right? 2012.
Yeah, that's right. And you talk about too, protecting people. Obviously, your job has been in protection for a long time. Obviously, what you guys have done in the Special Forces and stuff like that. But when you're a dad, and I asked a lot of the Special Forces guys this, is because for regular civilian dads who don't have the kind of experience, training, all this, accolades to go on, sometimes it can be overwhelming to protect your family, especially with everything going on right now, especially in the U.S. Crime has been true to ceiling in most cities across the country here. What advice do you have for the fathers out there, especially the new dads that are taking their families either on vacation to a city or just trying to, what can they do to keep their families safe while they're out and about, especially in an American city?
I think for me is, when we're away, that's where we're most vulnerable, because we're not there to protect the family. Some of these fathers who aren't Special Forces, the fact that they are there day in, day out, and, that itself is protecting them. But it's just all about being a role model. That's what I've sort of found with society over the last, especially it seems to fast track the last 5 years, is chivalry and just being a young man, being a gentleman, being a role model for your kids. I remember my father, he was in the military, and he never swore once in front of me. I remember being the age 18 when I was already in the military, and I was telling him a joke, and I had to warn him that I was going to swear, But that was a reflection on what I'd learned from my father. So you have to be conscious that these children are absorbing everything you do. Everything you do, the way you act, the way you talk is a reflection on them. So for us with our kids, I don't really sit them down and go into the do's and don'ts of security, especially the worst case scenario as well. I just naturally will do something and they will ask questions. Why are you doing that? And then I can do it. So literally just being there is the first thing. Second thing is, educate them, but just educate them through your actions. That's all I can say. But, just being a father, being there, protecting them more than probably what we are in the special forces, because we're not actually there. Obviously, we're protecting them on the bigger picture, the bigger scale. But yeah, if you ask most of the special forces guys, they would love to spend more time with their children.
Yeah, no doubt. And there's definitely, for one reason or another, there's a fatherless crisis in our country. There is so many kids that don't have that father's presence in their lives. There are a lot of kids growing up without a father in the home. Maybe the father chose not to be there. Maybe it's a family court decision that's keeping the father away. And you have, so many different scenarios that play into this. But we are suffering from a fatherless crisis and a breakdown of our nuclear family units. Yeah. And in my opinion, I harp on it on this show a lot because I really believe that if we could get this family problem solved and more dads in the home, we wouldn't see all this chaos that we're seeing unfold throughout our country. What's your take?
Yeah, and well, I actually was one of those children, actually. So my parents split up when I was aged 8, and my mother took me and my 2 sisters back to Manchester, where she was originally from. And I ended up in a homeless home in Moss Side, which was the roughest ghetto in the whole of the UK at the time. Me and my sisters were the only Caucasian kids in the school, and I was a victim of racism there. I was fighting all the time as well. But my father would commute every other weekend, 240 miles one way to grab us and 240 miles back. Every second weekend, he would pick us up, take us back, and sort of take us away from that environment. And he put his career on pause. He was actually posted to Germany as a regimental sergeant major. He said, no, I want to stay in UK. I want to be there for my kids. And 2 years later, it came to a head in a court battle. And the judge at the time was like, I'm not splitting up the siblings. They make the choice where they want to live, which I thought was a good decision. However, the decision was on my shoulders at the age of 10 because I was the eldest child. And so I chose to live with my father. Him and I had a close bond. And I could have easily fallen in that trap of those what you're talking about, a fatherless family. But, I saw my father, I saw him as a role model, and he took us away from that. And from then on, everything was good, but how easy it could have gone one way or the other. We may not have been having this conversation if the judge had said, no, they're staying with their mother.
Wow, incredible. And then how about as far as the discipline portion of this goes? Obviously, you're a well-disciplined individual, but what type of disciplinarian are you as a father, and is that different than the discipline style that you grew up with?
Yeah, it's very different from what I grew up with. Generations change and we learn from the previous generations. My father did a lot of things right and he did some things wrong. And so I just take, again, like that sponge, I take what worked and what didn't work and try and install that in my kids. For me, my father was a Scottish sergeant major, so I wasn't. Sports was big in our family. He was the army soccer manager, player, and coach, and so I loved sport as well. But I wasn't allowed to play with my friends until I'd done my homework. I wasn't allowed out the house, and so because he wanted me to have an academic career. He didn't want me to sort of go along the military route, which I ended up doing anyway. But so for me, it's like let your children be what they want to be. Don't force it on them. My son now is 7, still doesn't know what sport he wants to play, but I'm not going to instill that on him. But a good friend of mine back in UK, he must be the most loving father I see around his kids. My eyes, my face lights up when I see him around his children, and he's almost like overly in love. But his father was a pastor, and he had to make a 1-hour appointment each week to sit down with his father. And so he was at one end of the spectrum. Now he's just learned from that. He doesn't want his children to go through that. So I think there's stuff that we can take back from our previous generation that does work. I think discipline, that you still need to have discipline, the chivalry, that your P's and the Q's, being polite, all that. But do we need to be as strict as we possibly were back then? No, let them be children. Let them make mistakes. And so, there's an element of both. 50-50, I said. I've instilled.
Yeah, I love that, Dean. And it's so hard to kind of do that today, too, with the technology. It kind of speeds up their learning curve so quickly. I have 2 teenagers. I have a 17, a 16, and then I have a 12 and an 8. But my teenagers, it's virtually almost impossible for me to guard them with the technology. They're so far more advanced than I am with all of this stuff. And they've kind of, in a sense, they've grown up, like if you drive through the streets and the ballparks here, they're all empty. Kids ain't outside playing in the street like they used to. They're all on these devices, and they're growing up in a different way, but they're taking on so much more. You have access to everything on this phone. They have whatever they want to get involved in, they can find it on this internet. And it's so hard to curb that as a father, and it's difficult. With the younger ones, it's a little easier to control their screen time and what they can see and put the guards on their phone that they can't crack and get around. But as they get into these teenage years, it's very difficult to kind of guard. What do you have any kind of advice or insight on how to protect them from all this nonsense on social media and with the technology?
Yeah, well, my wife actually teaches child exploitation online protection. So she goes into more to the dark side of it. So we're always mindful of that. But we are. The thing is, we can't punish our children. They're born into this society. They're born into the world of internet. We're probably an era where we knew before the mobile phones, and but it's that instant gratification. There are the benefits of social media and of sort of the internet, and there are the negatives. And so for me, again, it's finding the balance. And the worst thing to do is just take the phone off or disconnect the internet. It's almost trying to find that balance. And so with our kids, we make sure that we do something, at least go out an hour each day, whether we're kicking the ball down the park, whether we're just going for a walk, or yesterday we go for a swim. It's just trying to find the balance. I think if you take that from them, they'll resent you for it. So it's trying to work or find that balance again. But we sometimes look on the internet, what can we go do? This, again, is the advantage of the internet is, like, you probably didn't know what you had around you before the internet. You talk about the special forces, years have passed, we were all under the radar, no one knew about us. I mean, Google came. And so, you can do Google searches. So it's just trying to find the balance. But for us, we just make sure that there is a period where there is no mobile phones, and if the mobile phone is with us, it's to take family photos.
Yeah, and you're right. There's so many great things. I'm talking to you now because of the internet. Like, I've been able to talk to so many different people and have this opportunity because of it. But like, if you watch too, I know Sound of Freedom that just exploded here. We see the child sex trafficking that's going on, and a lot of them use these devices to get into the kids and gain access to them. So there's so many different dangerous aspects to the internet, but it does provide us with so many positive things as well. It's a big paradox. There's no doubt about that. Yeah. Your book, Relentless, hit the listeners with a little bit about that. Where can they find it? What's been the feedback on it?
Yeah, so the feedback's been great. It's almost 3 stories, 3 books in one. It's in 3 stages. The first third is my childhood in the military, and I stop on selection on the special forces. I don't divulge into any of the special forces operations, just to protect my friends. But then the middle portion, the second portion, is the private security sector. I actually did more sensitive jobs as a civilian than I did when I was in the special forces. But I've talked about a couple of them. It sounds very sexy in Hollywood, but I've never had to use any weapons. It's understanding the politics, the demographics, the tribal influences. That was the success of me doing those evacuations. And then the world record bike ride. Everything I'd learned from those first 2 portions of the book as a child, from my time in the military, my time in the private security sector, and I then just put it on to a sport I'd never done before. I generally believe you can't be experienced without experiences. So it was those experiences, even as a young child, my parents splitting up, that built that resilience up, and that sort of helped me in my latter years. And then obviously the spoiler is I break the world record.
Yeah, incredible too. What was it? 14,000 miles in
14,000 miles, the world's longest road from southern Argentina to northern Alaska. And like I said, I'd only cycled 20 miles before I applied for the world record at the age of 40. So I wasn't a young pup. And yeah, the world record was 117 days. I became the first man in history to do it on 100 days in 99 days, 12 hours and 56 minutes. But as the story unfolds, there's reasons why I had to be speeding up. Every time I started hitting my objective then kept moving.
Incredible. Yeah, awesome story. I'm going to have the link to the book, Relentless, in the description of this podcast episode, so my listeners can tap the link, get over there and check it out. Last thing I want to hit you with here, Dean, I love to ask all the dads that I get on the podcast, what type of advice do you have for that brand new dad out there, or for that about to be father who's out there listening?
Well, firstly, stay off the internet. There's no real advice on there. There's nothing in the internet can give you as advice. Just be natural. Maybe we're all children ourselves. Take the positives and the negatives from your father, and just install that into your children. And there's no right way or wrong way.
Yeah, very well said. I love the message. It's been an honor for me. I got to say, Dean Stott, you're a first-class father all the way. And thank you so much for giving me a few minutes of your time here on First Class Fatherhood.
Thank you, Alec. Appreciate having me.